I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. My job interview at United Technologies. Lydia came home and said, United Technologies is looking for a maintenance supervisor. And I said, oh, really? I was working at Borg Warner at the time, and Borg Warner was making noises like they were going to close the plant. Now, they stayed open for another 4 or 5 years, but I didn't want to risk having the plant close under me. So I was looking for someplace else to be. I'd also been at Borg Warner for 5 years, and it was a pretty stagnant company. There were not many places to go up in the organization, and I didn't want to stay at where I was at. I didn't want to be a maintenance man, going out every day and fixing equipment, crawling through dirt, getting dirty and burnt, and all the other things that you do when you're repairing equipment. So when Lyd told me about UTC wanting a maintenance supervisor, I thought, oh, this is great. They're right here in Coldwater. I won't have to move, because I'd been applying for jobs other places. So I went down to UTC and walked in and said I wanted an application. Got the application, filled it out, went back, turned it in, didn't think anything more about it. 2 days later, I got a phone call. You want to come in for an interview? Sure, I would love to. So that night after work, I went down to UTC. I went in, met Al Dow, the human resources manager. Then with him, I went in and met the plant manager, Rex Barton. Rex was kind of a nice guy. And we talked a little bit, and he said, well, would you like to do a plant tour? And I said, sure. So Al took me out to walk through the plant. I started working at the foundry. And the foundry was a rough place. I mean, it was hard on equipment. It was hard on everything. But they repaired things as they broke. You spent a lot of time repairing things, but they repaired things as they broke. They didn't let them just sit there broken for days, months, years. I'm walking through the plant. First thing I noticed was the floor was rutted. I mean, ruts this deep. One of the operations of doing aluminum extrusion is you have to harden the aluminum extrusions. That means you run it into a aging oven. An aging oven just brings it up about 300 or 400 degrees, stays in there 4 or 5 hours, comes out the other end, and it's hard. Hard for aluminum. Well, to put it in and out of the oven, aluminum isn't very heavy, and the stuff that they were extruding was 20 to 30 feet long. So they had these long carts that they would set it on. And then they'd pick up one end of the cart with a forklift and shove it in to the age oven. And there were 4 different age ovens. So they would maneuver them around, and whichever one was open, that's the one that the next load went into. They were on steel wheels, and the steel wheels ground a hole in the concrete. And I thought, wow, they wore right down through the concrete. Well, they had. They'd gone down about an inch. The rest of it was dirt. Aluminum extrusions involve a whole lot of wax and oil. And the aluminum extrusion presses were hydraulic presses. So they had a whole lot of oil in them. And they also leaked. So they used a lot of oil dry. You take a combination like that, and it forms into something that's pretty close to concrete, but it's not quite. It's more like real thick black dirt, clay, mixed with oil, pounded down by steel wheels and fork trucks. So I'm looking at the floor thinking, oh my God, what a mess. So we walked through the anodized plant. And the anodized plant is one of the cleaner areas of the plant. All they ever did was just put a plain old anodized finish on a piece of aluminum like a screen door. No colors, no nothing fancy, just run it through the soak tank, drop it in the anodized tank, run it down to the rinse tank, put it in the seal tank, done. Wasn't very much to it. Big overhead cranes, people doing a lot of moving of aluminum bars. Then we walked on to the shipping area. There's a lot of people packaging aluminum, and it wasn't anything unusual. Fabrication area was next to that, and they were just cutting bars to length. They didn't weld anything together, didn't attach anything. All they did was cut bars to length. So I'm thinking, well, that's not too bad. Then we went up by the presses, and as I'm walking down the aisle, between the two big presses, there's a 1,650-ton Youngstown press and a 1,200-ton Sutton press. I'm walking by the Youngstown, and all of a sudden a line on top of the Youngstown blows. Now I later learned that it had two 100 horsepower electric motors up on top of it that ran two hydraulic pumps, big old oil gear pumps. Pumped out a lot of oil. They do 100 gallons a minute. And with two of them, when you blow the main line, that gives you a potential of pumping out 200 gallons a minute if the line is big enough. This was the main manifold between the two pumps, so it was a 3-inch line. A lot of oil comes out of that. What it had in the middle of it was two blocks, and the blocks had O-ring in between them and 4 bolts that clamped them together. So what had happened was the O-ring had sheared, had extruded out through the gap between those two blocks and lost seal. Well, it was spraying oil straight up in the air. I mean, like a frickin' geyser. Because when you put oil between two 4-inch plates, it spreads out in this big fan-shaped thing. And there was oil going everywhere. And I thought, why don't they shut it off? Well, it turns out when you have an aluminum billet in the die, if you shut the press off, the aluminum billet cools, freezes, locks the die into the backer, and also ties the container to the die. So you have this big container, which is the thing that holds the billet that the ram comes in and squishes the aluminum out through the die and pushes the aluminum through the die and out through the platen and on down the runout table. If that stops moving, it freezes solid. And then you have to take the container apart, you take the die apart, you take everything out of the press, and it's all one big rivet of aluminum in it. You take the ram out because the ram is frozen inside there. You take it all, you put it in a big tank of sodium hydroxide, and the sodium hydroxide eats the aluminum, and it eventually works its way through, and you end up with a container and a die and a bolster and a ram. But it has to sit outside in a big steel tub with a burner running under it for at least a week, sometimes longer, depending on how bad it is. So they wouldn't shut the press off, they just kept it running. And oil's spraying up. Right next to the press is a thing called a billet heater. And the billet heater is just a big long tunnel with gas jet burners on either side of it. It's about 25, 30 feet long. And had a chain that acted as a conveyor that ran the billets down through the oven. So you had a source of fire, and you had a container that was about 900 degrees. you had aluminum billet that came out of the oven at about 900 degrees, and you had oil spraying all over the place. Just not a good thing. Al said, they've gotten really good at fixing that. They can fix it in about half an hour. I said, they do it that often? Yeah, it happens quite a bit. Because usually when you get good at something, it's from practice. So rather than, in my head, I'm thinking rather than fixing something, they're patching it. So as I walked past that, we left there because I didn't want to stick around and watch anymore. I was worried it was going to catch fire. We walked around behind press number 3. And I noticed that there was an oil line on the back of the press that had a big rag tied around it. Then a line right next to it that had a big ball of weld. It was a 1/2-inch line hooked to a 2-inch line, and the weld where the two were connected together was a big ball about 4 inches in diameter, where they had welded and welded and welded and welded and welded and welded. That's a lot of patches that you put on there. So that was the nature of how they did business, was weld, 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 patch, 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 change out O-rings, never shut down. Well, I walked through the remelt department, which is a whole another thing, and I went up to the office, and I went into Rex's office, and I said, I can't take the job. He said, why not? I said, your people don't know how to weld. First thing you got to do before you weld a line is you got to grind away the old weld. You can't just keep adding weld over the top of it. And I thanked him and walked out, thinking I'm not going to work there. And really, you didn't want to. It looked like a nightmare. Well, that night I got a phone call, and Al said, you sure you don't want to work here? I said, nope, I don't. Sorry, Al, I don't. He said, well, we'll offer you this much money. And I was making $7.50 an hour at Borg Warner, which in 1980 was really good money. So it was a good offer, but I didn't want to work there. A couple days later, I'm at work at Borg Warner, and I get a phone call. So I go up to the office and I take the phone call. Fortunately, I'm in a place where nobody can overhear me talking, because I'm talking to a potential new employer. And Al's offering me more money. I said, no, I don't want to. I thought, Borg Warner's a really nice company. Matter of fact, it was a great company. They treated you like a member of the family. You got vacation, and you also got paid sick days. And there was no limit to how many paid sick days you took. Now, nobody took advantage of it. That was the reason that we were able to work out the way we were at Borg Warner. It was, you didn't do that. You just didn't do that. It was really hard to get hired in there, but once you were there, you were family. So UTC didn't give me any of the vibe that I really wanted to work there. I wanted to go to someplace better. So another day went by, and I got a third phone call. And he offered me crazy money. Double my salary. And $10,000 more than their original bid. Now, I've often said to other people that ask me questions about whether they should take a job, I always tell them never go for money, because they'll own you. Go to a place that you want to go to. And go to something, don't run away from anything. If you've got a horrible job and you leave your horrible job because it's a horrible job and you run to the first chance you get, chances are it's going to be not so good. Look where you want to be, go where you want to be, do what you got to do to get there. But I didn't know that lesson yet. So I went to UTC, became the maintenance supervisor. And oh man, all those things that were wrong, I got to fix them. I was there almost 10 years. It got better than what it was when it started. It was a rough place to work, and I got a lot more stories about working at UTC. But those are for another day. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.
This video is not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union, without the express written permission of the parents or legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.